I'm a trucker for a local company out of Montana. We deliver all throughout the states, but mostly my routes went to and from the Midwest. Where we were based out of, no big highways really go directly through us, and so a lot of my routes are on long, barren roads with very little traffic. Even other truckers were few and far between. Anyway, I was on a pretty standard route this night, heading through the usual states to a common supplier. I always had my CB radio, picking up Channel 19, which is the universal line that most truckers use to communicate with each other if need be, or just to have conversations. Although it usually remained quiet for all of my drives, because nobody was within range. At about 1 a.m., the radio started crackling, like it was connecting to something, or picking up a signal in the distance. Faintly, I could hear a man talking, but it was way too scratchy and muffled to make anything out from it. I tried shutting it off and turning it back on, but it seemed to have lost signal to whoever it was picking up from. I thought nothing of it and kept driving. The road and the radio stayed quiet for another little while. I didn't pass by any other cars or even buildings. It was just empty. And then the radio came back on again. It was just crackling, with no voices. And after 30-ish seconds, the crackling started to get obnoxiously loud. I thought the thing might have been broken, and was considering just shutting it off for the rest of the drive. But just before I reached over, a voice came through. It wasn't clear by any means, but it was definitely the same voice from the man a while back, and the radio seemed to have picked up in the middle of him speaking. I was able to barely make out what he was saying. He was listing off details, describing something in this eerie, monotone voice. Gray cab, white doors, white trailer, blank sides. He was listing the exact description of the semi I was driving, and at the end of this unsettling descriptive line of details, he said the direction I was driving in, and then his voice abruptly cut out. The radio crackled and buzzed, with nothing else. No responses and no more voices. I left it just quietly crackling for several minutes before shutting it off. What the hell was that? I checked all my mirrors and looked everywhere, but there were no other cars or trucks near me. How was anyone in range to be on the radio? And why did they have an exact detailed description of what I was driving? I was actually weirded out and nervous enough to call one of my buddies back at the warehouse, just to let him know about this strange thing going on, but my call dropped because I had no service. For the next half hour, I couldn't stop thinking about it. It honestly felt unexplainable. I knew that there was a gas station up ahead, so I decided even though my tank wasn't too low, I'd stop there, top off the tank, and maybe head in to ask the attendant if they knew anything about this weird radio message. This gas station was very small and very remote. As I pulled in, it was also very obvious that the store part where an attendant would be was closed. I still pulled through and parked near a pump. I got out and started to top up the tank. I was tired, and as I stood there waiting and looking around, the gas station started to give me an uncomfortable feeling. Not just that I was alone out there, with nothing around, but more that I felt like I wasn't alone. I took the pump out early, just to get out of there. I got in and started to pull out, and the moment I did, I saw a truck coming down the road from the direction I just came from. They had no headlights on, and the truck looked beat up, rusting and very old. Looked like they were about to turn into the gas station, but when they saw me pulling out, they stopped. Like just right there in the road, lights off and waiting. After a moment, I continued to get on the road and drive. Hard not to think the truck was trying to go unnoticed, which is obviously very suspicious. The way they stopped was like they were hoping I didn't see them. That feeling, though, the uneasy feeling, didn't really go away like I thought it would. Something still felt like it was wrong. And I got just a few minutes down the road before coming to a stop. there was a car right in the middle of the road, partially sideways, and in front of it was a man. He was waving his arms at me and walking quickly toward the door to my truck, as if telling me to stop and that he needed help. His car looked undamaged though, and he didn't even look hurt. And it's not like there was anything out here that could have possibly forced him to stop in the middle of the road like that. As he was approaching, I instinctively looked in my mirror and just heartily saw a shape emerging from the road behind me. I knew it was that truck from the gas station, and right away I knew this was some sort of trap. I pushed on the gas, and this guy in front of me was committed, or dumb enough, to not even jump out of the way. I nearly ran him over, trying to get around him, and somehow even maneuvered into the other lane and around the car without hitting it. Maybe the trailer scraped up against it a bit, but nothing too bad. When I looked back, I saw the truck stop by the man and another man get out. One of them even looked like he was yelling at the other. I reported it to the police when I had a chance to, but of course the cars and the men were gone by then. I still don't truly know what was going on. If it was the truck on the radio, then he had been following me for a while, and been in contact with the car ahead of me, I guess coordinating this plan to get me to stop. I'm just thankful I listened to my gut and left the gas station when I did, and didn't even try to figure out what was going on the road. One wrong move probably could have ended with me going missing on the side of that isolated highway.
People were getting ready to have a gathering at their homes, and kids were especially excited for the Easter festivities to begin. Aunt Genuine had set up a table for all the kids. The eggs were all assembled there, and the paints were all set. She was ready to sit with the children and paint the eggs however they liked. She was looking forward to all the different ideas the kids in the house would share with her. Paul and Cliff were already out and arranging the whole barbecue and a little PlayStation for the kids that were going to arrive. Georgina was busy preparing all the food and arranging the snacks and drinks. Malcolm, who also was the youngest of the three brothers, didn't arrive yet. He was a detective. The David family in the suburban of New York was an upbeat big joint family of three brothers and their family, and the house was always filled with the noises of children. The suburban American lifestyle that everybody wanted, their end goal to be, was achieved by the Davids. Malcolm was the youngest. He was the detective at the local police department, and the other was Paul David. He was a stockbroker at the New York Stock Exchange. And then there was Cliff David, the investment banker. So as far as the career choices of Davids go, Paul and Cliff were bringing in a whole lot of money, and that was the initial reason they got to move out to the suburbia. Aunt Genuine was their only sister, and probably was the kindest of all. She was a teacher at a local school, and was highly regarded in the community due to her behavior. David was highly regarded in the area, and even helped out everyone when they got the chance. It was rare for someone in their position to be this kind, and people around them were happy. Paul and Cliff both had their children, and were both divorced. They got custody of the children, and some even say that it was Cliff who run some contacts to win the custody. But nothing bad was said about them, because of their kindness and constant help they gave the community. They were holding the annual Easter egg hunting in their backyard, and were very excited about it. A lot of children from the local community were there, and they were all excited to see all the fun activities that David had for them. All the kids that entered were provided a bib to keep things running smoothly. A big lunch for everyone in town was arranged, and everyone mingled and talked about anything and everything. A whole lot of kids were found egg hunting, and were enjoying the event. The whole Easter went up smoothly, and then later on, when all the kids were called into the front gate, a number of them lined up with all the eggs they had found. Every single kid was there. But there was no sign of Paul's son and Cliff's son. They went to look for them, as they thought they might have been doing the egg hunting still. They looked everywhere. There was no sign of both the boys in the radius of the event. They decided to call the police, and the event was brought to a halt. Every guest was thoroughly questioned, and no one knew anything about the boys. The police were scared about losing light, and they know that once it got dark, it would become difficult to find the children. Then, one of the kids that were egg hunting with the boys told what happened, and he told the police that a big rabbit took both the boys with them. Malcolm decided to take the lead on the case and officially declared it the case of kidnapping. He knew that every moment is precious, so he put on a call for search and issued a judge-signed an order to search the area under the radius of 10 kilometers, and even to cease and arrest anyone dressed in a rabbit suit. And there were a lot of people who were dressed as a rabbit, and the closest was the local boy who was dressing up as the rabbit in their party. Malcolm started to interrogate him, and the boy explained that how could have he kidnapped the boys if he was right here at the party? By logic, Malcolm agreed. The boy then acknowledged Malcolm and the tense situation he was in. Paul and Cliff were both keeping this under the house for now, and they didn't want in any way to get the press involved, so they kept checking in with Malcolm on the process. Search team had no update, and the forest area was being searched down by everyone in town. Paul didn't want his wife to get involved, so he never told her about the kidnapping. Cliff, on the other hand, decided to call in the wife. She was scared and angry and pleaded for Malcolm to find them soon. Malcolm was losing light, so he called in reinforcements and decided to do an air search over the forest. The search was now unsuccessful. It started raining. The helicopter was called off, and the forest was now getting denser and darker to search in. The search was not being held off. Everyone out of their town they're willing to look for the kids regardless of the weather. And now, as the time was moving forward, the search was put on hold. Everyone returned from their search in the forest. Everyone stood by their side all the time, and there was not a single person in the community that wasn't willing to do everything possible. The night passed, and everyone was still wide awake, and everything they could. Malcolm decided to do a run-through for every dress vendor in the block to see all the other rabbit costume rentals. One by one, they started interrogating everyone who had the rabbit dress on, but there was no luck. Everyone's alibi checked out. There was no clue to as who was the giant rabbit who took the kids. They decided to another full sweep of the house, and surprisingly in the basement, found another rabbit costume. They decided to send it to the forensics to get the prints, and prints they found didn't match anyone in the system, and so the next suspects were the people in the house the other day. There were only 3 people who had the access to the basement: Paul, Genuine, Malcolm. And weirdly, none of them seemed to be the suspect, but Malcolm still decided to get everyone's prints. 3 days had gone by. There was no clue to as where the kids were. They waited for the results on the prints on the costume found in the basement. It wasn't a match, meaning there was a 4th person inside their basement. They were clueless about the intruder because of the event. In a surprising turn of events, one of the dry cleaners who rented the rabbit costume noticed an irregularity in his ledger. He said that the guy who was the Easter rabbit at David's party had rented out 2 different costumes. Malcolm showed the photogenic evidence of the costume found in the basement and showed it to the shopkeeper. He confirmed that it was the same costume. Malcolm was pissed that he let the man slip right under his fingers. They put an APB on the man and issued a nationwide arrest for the man. 3 days later, the guy was found in an alleyway in a completely different state. He was planning on escaping the country. He was questioned after he was brought in. He agreed to have kidnapped the children, but he said that all he did was hand out the children to a woman. The description of the woman matched that of Paul's wife. Their doubt became clear, and maybe the reason why she never called him back when Paul tried to inform him about the lost children. Malcolm took a SWAT team and decided to raid her house, but to his surprise, the house was empty. The case twisted itself even more. They brought in surveillance tape from every bus station, every railway station, and the airport to see if they ever left the state. But there was no luck. Paul suggested Malcolm look for them at the family cabin in the forest up north. They decided to move, and it turned out to be an inn lead. There was no one, but the ash in the fireplace seemed recent, and Malcolm ordered an aerial thermal search of the area to get all sort of heat signature. 2 hours after the big search, the helicopter picked up 3 heat signals, and it was from inside of the river. Their biggest fear was now coming alive. The rescue team and the paramedics were called. After an hour, body of one female that matched the descriptions of Paul's wife was found tied to that of 2 boys who matched the description of both Paul's son and Cliff's son. And from her legs were tied to a lot of bricks. They were drained out of blood from previously inflicted wounds, and later on in reports, turned out the kids were dead before they were drowned, but the woman, on the other hand, died because of drowning. Upon searching, a suicide note was recollected blaming Paul for the suicide. Paul could not bear this pain, and he was found hanging in his room a day later. Cliff was destroyed, and the Davids was not the same happy family they once were. Malcolm took on drinking and failed throughout his career and was later on suspended. The terrible suicide distraught the family, or that was what it seemed to them, until the same case was called in on Easter next year. It was the Fowlers this time. What seemed like suicide was now a case of a serial killer. The case of Dav opened up again, and Malcolm was put in on the case. This is how the story of the Easter Bunny killer started.
I rented the cabin because I wanted silence. After the breakup, silence felt like the only thing that might fix me. No friends checking in, no city noise, and no reminders of him packed into every corner of my apartment. All I had was snow, trees, and a week to myself to clear my mind. The listing warned about limited cell service and heavy winter conditions, but I welcomed that. I told myself I would leave early if the weather turned awful. The snow turned bad faster than expected. By the second night, the road I had driven in on was completely buried. The world outside the cabin appeared sealed shut when I woke up the next morning. Thick snow piled against the porch steps, and the trees bowed under its weight. My phone showed no signal. The radio crackled but offered nothing useful. I felt a flicker of unease, but I told myself this was what I came for. Suddenly, I noticed a snowman. It stood near the tree line, far enough back that I almost missed it. It was tall and uneven, built crudely, with no face and no decorations. What bothered me was the location. People would not drag snow that far from the cabin to build one, especially with an unclear path leading to it. I checked the ground around it. There were no footprints, no tracks, nothing disturbed the snow at all. I laughed it off, convincing myself it had been there before I arrived and that the snowfall had simply covered the tracks. Still, I kept glancing toward it while I made breakfast. Something about it felt intentional, like it had been placed there to be seen. That night, just after midnight, I heard tapping. It was soft at first, almost polite. Tap, tap, tap. I sat up in bed, heart racing, staring at the dark window. Snow brushed against the glass as the wind picked up, and I told myself that was all it was. Branches, ice. My imagination was spiraling because I was alone. The tapping stopped. I barely slept. The next morning, the snowman was closer. Now it stood halfway between the trees and the cabin. The distance it had moved was impossible to ignore. I put on my boots and stepped outside, my breath fogging the air as I circled it from a distance. The snow around it was still pristine. No signs of movement, no trail, just smooth white ground leading up to its base. I felt stupid for being scared of something so harmless. That night, the tapping came again. This time it was louder, more deliberate. It moved from one window to another, slow and methodical, like someone walking around the cabin. I stayed frozen under my blankets, barely breathing, until it stopped. I did not check outside. On the third day, the snowman stood just beyond the porch. I could see it clearly through the front window. Its shape looked more defined now, tighter packed. I noticed something dark near its center, like shadows trapped beneath the surface. I tried calling for help again, but my phone remained useless. The radio only hissed back at me. Anger finally outweighed fear. I grabbed the shovel from the porch and marched toward the snowman, my boots crunching loudly against the snow. I raised the shovel and brought it down hard, splitting the top section apart. Snow collapsed in chunks, and something tumbled free onto the ground. A scarf. It was stiff with ice, patterned with faded red stripes. I recognized the texture immediately because I owned one just like it. Beneath it, a glove fell loose, fingers curled as if they had frozen that way. As I struck again, strands of dark hair slid out, clumped together and tangled. I dropped the shovel and backed away, nausea rising in my throat. These were not decorations, they were belongings. I ran back into the cabin and locked the door, shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone. That night, I pushed furniture against the bedroom door and kept the lights on. I told myself morning would come and I would leave no matter what the road looked like. At exactly 12:16 a.m., the tapping started. It was right outside my bedroom window. I turned my head slowly, every muscle screaming at me to not look. The curtain shifted slightly, as if brushed by something heavy. The tapping continued, slower now, each knock deliberate. When I forced myself to look, I saw it. A second snowman stood inches from the glass. This one was smaller, compacted tightly, its surface smoother. Pressed into its chest was a frozen clump of hair, positioned like it was meant to be seen. I screamed and collapsed against the wall, sobbing until my throat burned. The tapping did not stop until dawn. When the sky finally lightened, I left. I forced my car through the snow until the tires caught the road beneath. I did not stop driving until I reached town and collapsed into the first cafe I saw. 3 days later, I looked it up. A woman had gone missing near the cabin the previous winter. She was last seen driving up alone after a breakup. Search teams never found her body. They never found her clothes either. I still think about that second snowman. Could it be a sign from her murderer that he had been observing me all along?